Stop resisting or I'll have you arrested. That's what HOA Karen Pemberton screamed while trying to steal my $3 million island at gunpoint, sheriff's deputy gunpoint, but the barrel was still pointed at my chest. 6 a.m., Lake Travis, Texas. I'm sipping black coffee on my floating fortress when twin diesels rip through the fog. Out of the mist storms a borrowed sheriff's patrol boat, blue lights flashing like a bad action movie. At the helm, Karen, bleached hair whipping, business suit screaming, "I own the lake," clutching seizure papers faker than her Botox. Diesel fumes choke the air, mixing with her dollar store perfume as she docks with a crash. "This illegal structure is seized under emergency HOA authority," she shrieks, voice cracking like cheap glass. I set my mug down, smile for the GoPro, and drop the bomb. "Karen, that's armed robbery on federal waters. 4K evidence. Tell the judge hi from your cell." What would you do if an HOA tyrant held you at gunpoint for your life's work? Drop your location and worst Karen story below. My name's Marcus Tank Rodriguez, and I've been dealing with HOA psychos for 6 months now. 20 years in the Navy taught me how to build anything, anywhere, under any conditions. 4 tours as a CB combat engineer. I've constructed bridges under mortar fire and repaired runways while dodging sniper rounds, building a floating island on a peaceful Texas lake. That was supposed to be my retirement hobby. The property came from my grandfather, Sergeant Eduardo Rodriguez, Korean War veteran who bought 2 acres of Lake Travis waterfront back when you could still afford it. Modest 1970s cabin, weathered dock, and the kind of peace that comes from knowing you earned every square foot. When Grandpa passed 3 years ago, he left me more than land. He left me a mission. "Mijo," he'd always said, gripping my shoulder with calloused hands that smelled like motor oil and Old Spice. "Never let anybody push you around because they think they're better than you." The texture of his worn challenge coin still feels real in my pocket, metal warm from decades of handling. So I built my island. 4 years of engineering, $3 million of materials and labor, and every maritime permit the federal government requires. Solar panels gleaming like mirrors, wind turbines spinning silent as a prayer, workshop equipped for anything from boat repair to emergency surgery. Self-sustaining, storm-rated, and completely legal in federal waters. That's where Karen Pemberton crawled out of her entitled hole. Picture a woman who thinks money makes her royalty and marriage makes her untouchable. Karen's 58, HOA president for 6 years, and married to County Commissioner Dale Pemberton, the man who controls sheriff department budgets, construction contracts, and half the county officials who owe him favors. She lives in a $2.8 million lakefront mansion that reeks of new money desperation, complete with imported marble and a boat dock that illegally extends 15 feet into federal waters. Karen runs Lakeside Estates HOA like Stalin ran the Soviet Union. The sound of her Louboutin heels clicking on dock planks announces incoming tyranny. Over 6 years, she's forced out 12 families, always veterans, minorities, or working-class folks who don't fit her country club fantasy. The Johnsons, an elderly black couple, got hit with $30K in landscaping violations until they sold for half their home's value. The Martinez family faced noise complaints every time their kids played outside, buried under legal bills until they gave up. Her secret weapon? Husband Dale provides sheriff's deputies for code enforcement, turning every HOA violation into a police matter. Nothing says comply or else like armed officers serving papers for grass height violations. The stench of corruption hit me with her first attack 2 months after I finished the island. A certified letter arrived, thick as a legal brief and twice as threatening, demanding $50,000 in emergency fines for my unpermitted structure. The paper felt expensive, but the threats were pure trailer park. Remove the island or face criminal charges. Here's what Princess Karen didn't know. I'd done my homework. Federal waters mean federal jurisdiction. The Corps of Engineers had approved my permits. The Coast Guard had inspected my navigation lights. Karen's HOA authority ended at the high water mark, and my island floated free in waters controlled by Uncle Sam, not some corrupt county commissioner's wife. When I politely explained this in my response letter, her perfume-drenched reply arrived 3 days later, reeking of desperation and expensive fragrance. No more asking, pure threatening. We'll see about that, Mr. Rodriguez. Some people need to learn their place in this community. That's when the coffee in my mouth turned to ash, and I realized the truth. This wasn't about regulations or aesthetics. This was about power, control, and a woman who'd spent 6 years crushing anyone who dared stand up to her. Karen wanted my island gone because it proved something she couldn't stomach. that a brown-skinned veteran could build something her money couldn't buy and her authority couldn't touch. My grandfather's voice echoed clear across the water. "Stand your ground, mijo. Bullies only understand strength." Karen's first real attack came like a legal tsunami, lawyers, badges, and enough intimidation to crush most normal people into submission. She hired Blackstone and Associates, the kind of white shoe law firm that charges $500 to sneeze in your direction. Their demand letter arrived on paper so thick and expensive it felt like parchment between my fingers, all embossed gold letterhead and threatening language about environmental damage and federal violations. $2 million. That's what they wanted for destroying lake ecosystem, plus immediate removal of my illegal structure. They claimed my island was leaching chemicals, disrupting fish habitat, and creating a navigation hazard that threatened community safety. Pure fiction, but wrapped in enough legal jargon to scare anyone without a military pension and 20 years of dealing with government bureaucracy. But Karen's real power wasn't the lawyers, it was the badges. Dale's sheriff's deputies started showing up for routine inspections of my island, always armed, always aggressive, treating a legal structure like a drug house raid. Deputy Morrison, a thick-necked bully whose breath reeked of stale donuts and authority issues, made these visits feel like military occupation. "Mr. Rodriguez," he'd grunt, hand resting on his service weapon while the smell of his cheap aftershave mixed with diesel fumes from his patrol boat. "We've received reports about suspicious activity on your structure. Mind if we take a look around?" They filed complaints with every agency that had letters after their name: Texas Parks and Wildlife, Corps of Engineers, EPA, even the Coast Guard. Each complaint triggered another inspection, another round of paperwork, another excuse to intimidate a veteran with official authority he'd once worn himself. Here's where Karen made her first fatal mistake. She got greedy and careless. While researching federal jurisdiction for my defense, something I'd learned during my Corps of Engineers training years ago, I discovered something that made me smile for the first time in weeks. Karen's precious boat dock, the one she launches her weekly yacht parties from, extends 23 feet into federal waters without a single federal permit. According to her own navigation hazard standards, she was violating everything she accused me of. Unlike my properly permitted island floating free in open water, her illegal dock was actually blocking boat traffic in a narrow channel. I remember reading about cases like this in military law courses, where local authorities try to enforce rules they're violating themselves. The irony tasted sweeter than my morning coffee as I filed a formal complaint with the Corps of Engineers about unpermitted structures in federal waters. Guess whose dock topped the list? But the real game changer came when my security cameras caught something Karen never expected anyone to see. Late one Tuesday night, I was reviewing footage when I spotted Dale's deputies conducting searches without warrants, inspections without authority, and investigations that looked exactly like the harassment campaigns we'd studied in military civil affairs training. These weren't law enforcement activities. They were fishing expeditions designed to intimidate. Elena Vasquez, a civil rights attorney I'd served with in Iraq, took one look at my footage and her expression shifted from concern to predatory focus. "Marcus, this isn't HOA enforcement. This is textbook federal civil rights violations. They're using government badges for personal vendettas." The sound of my printer working overtime filled the workshop as we documented every illegal inspection, every false complaint, every time Karen's corruption network weaponized law enforcement against a veteran on his own property. The smell of fresh ink mixed with lake breeze while we built a federal case that would flip this entire power structure. Jake Morrison, the grizzled marina owner, whose calloused hands told stories of 40 years working these waters, pulled me aside one evening as sunset turned the lake into molten copper. "Tank, that woman's pressuring me to revoke your slip lease," his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Says Dale will pull my business license if I don't cooperate. I ain't doing it, but you should know, they're targeting everyone who supports you." That revelation hit like cold lake water in my face. Karen wasn't just attacking me. She was systematically destroying anyone who refused to join her campaign of intimidation. The taste of righteous anger filled my mouth as I realized the scope of their corruption network. Time to show these entitled bullies what happens when you corner a combat engineer with federal law on his side. Karen's response to my federal complaint was swift, vicious, and revealed just how deep her corruption rabbit hole went. If weekly sheriff visits were annoying, I was about to discover what happens when you threaten a power-drunk county commissioner's wife with actual consequences. The sabotage started subtle. Anchor chains mysteriously loosened during nighttime safety patrols, solar panel wiring accidentally damaged during increasingly frequent inspections. But Karen underestimated something crucial. 20 years of Navy engineering taught me to build things bulletproof and defend them even better. Every midnight raid was caught on infrared cameras, every act of vandalism documented in crystal clear detail. Deputy Morrison's cigarette smoke would drift across the water like a warning beacon, giving me time to activate recording equipment before his patrol boat emerged from the darkness. "Safety inspection, Mr. Rodriguez," he'd grunt, stepping onto my dock with boots that left muddy prints on clean planking. The acrid smell of his stale tobacco mixed with cheap aftershave as he pretended to examine perfectly legal electrical connections. Anonymous reports of fire hazards and structural violations. Meanwhile, Karen orchestrated an anonymous complaint campaign that would make any dictator proud. Every day brought fresh accusations, suspicious nighttime activities, possible illegal construction, disturbing the peace with excessive noise. Each complaint triggered mandatory responses from increasingly irritated inspectors who recognized harassment when they saw it. But Karen's real masterstroke targeted my economic lifeline. Jake Morrison called Thursday morning, his weathered voice tight with stress that had aged him years and weeks. "Tank, Dale offered me a $200,000 county construction contract if I revoke your slip lease. When I refused, they threatened health department violations that'll shut me down." That phone call tasted like cold reality hitting warm coffee. This wasn't just HOA disputes. This was systematic economic warfare using government authority as a weapon against anyone who supported my right to exist. I remembered studying similar tactics during counterinsurgency training, where corrupt officials squeezed local businesses into compliance through selective enforcement. The difference was, back then we had clear authority to stop it. Here I was fighting the system from inside American bureaucracy. Elena's deep dive into county records revealed the pattern I should have recognized from military intelligence work. Her fingers traced connections across financial documents spread on my workshop table, like evidence at a corruption trial, papers rustling in the evening breeze that carried the honest scent of lake water and diesel fuel. 6 years, 12 families forced out, she explained, highlighting property transfers with a yellow marker that squeaked against paper. Every property subsequently developed by companies connected to Dale's construction business. Your island proves structures can be built safely here, undermining their environmental excuses. The bitter taste of understanding filled my mouth as the scope became clear. My floating fortress wasn't just an aesthetic problem. It was evidence that shattered their carefully constructed legal justifications for stealing waterfront property. Karen's desperation peaked when she attempted having my island classified as an abandoned vessel, subject to immediate removal. The legal filing was so ridiculous I actually laughed out loud, spraying coffee across my morning newspaper. Here's where Navy experience studying maritime law during port operations finally paid dividends. Abandoned vessel classification requires specific criteria that bureaucrats learn by rote. No maintenance, no habitation, actual navigation hazard. My island was occupied daily, maintained obsessively, and positioned in deep water away from any boat traffic. The mini twist that cracked Karen's facade came when Elena discovered the maritime salvage company listed in Karen's filing, Pemberton Marine Recovery, owned by Dale's brother Tommy. The entire abandoned vessel scheme was designed to legally steal my $3 million island and sell it for scrap metal profits. "Look at this beauty," Elena said, pulling up corporate filings on her laptop. The screen's blue glow illuminated her predatory smile as she traced shell company connections. "They plan to rescue your abandoned island for a $50,000 salvage fee, then auction it for parts worth millions." But their greed created a fatal flaw. Pemberton Marine Recovery had never filed proper salvage operator licenses with the Coast Guard, making their entire operation federally illegal before they even started. The sound of Elena's phone buzzing interrupted evening quiet as she received confirmation from federal maritime authorities. Her grin told me everything about Karen's latest legal catastrophe. "Marcus, they just committed federal fraud by filing false salvage claims. Karen's about to learn that stealing boats is a Coast Guard matter, not county business." Time to watch entitled bullies discover what federal maritime law enforcement looks like. Karen's final escalation before everything hit the fan was pure desperation wrapped in false patriotism and backed by the kind of government overreach that would make our founding fathers load their muskets and march on Washington. She convinced Dale to declare my island a potential terrorist threat, requiring immediate Coast Guard intervention. The paperwork she filed claimed I was stockpiling explosive devices and military equipment that posed imminent danger to community safety. According to Karen's sworn terrorism report, my solar batteries were potential bomb components. My workshop tools were weapons manufacturing equipment, and my Coast Guard-approved navigation lights were suspicious signaling devices for coordinating attacks. The absurdity would have been hilarious, like accusing Martha Stewart of running a meth lab because she owns kitchen knives, if it wasn't coming with federal law enforcement response and potential terrorism charges. But Karen made one crucial mistake in her domestic terrorism fantasy. She forgot I actually had security clearance and military records that federal agencies could verify with a single phone call. The Coast Guard response came at dawn Tuesday, but not the way Princess Karen expected. Instead of a SWAT-style raid to drag me away in handcuffs, Commander Tom Bradley arrived in an official Coast Guard cutter with a full inspection team and the kind of serious expression that comes from investigating false federal reports. "Mr. Rodriguez," he said, stepping onto my dock with crisp military bearing that immediately identified him as career Navy, "we're here to investigate reports of federal violations on your floating structure. I should inform you that filing false terrorism reports carries a federal mandatory minimum of 5 years." The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with my morning coffee as I invited the entire inspection team aboard my island. Bradley's experienced eyes swept across my workshop, taking in properly stored tools, legitimate construction materials, and the kind of organized military efficiency that screams professional veteran to anyone who's actually served. "Sir," I said, handing him my complete file of permits, inspections, and federal approvals thick enough to choke a horse. "Everything here was built to Corps of Engineers standards with full federal oversight. Someone's been feeding your office pure fiction." The inspection took 3 hours of professionals examining every solar panel connection, every structural joint, every safety system with the thoroughness of people who know the difference between legitimate construction and actual threats. The taste of vindication was sweeter than championship barbecue as they found 0 violations and multiple examples of engineering excellence that exceeded federal standards. But the real mini-twist came when Commander Bradley pulled me aside for a private conversation that flipped this entire game on its head. "Mr. Rodriguez, your service records show 20 years Navy with top-secret clearance and combat engineering specialties." His voice carried the weight of shared military brotherhood. "Someone just filed federal terrorism charges against a decorated combat veteran with spotless security background. That's not just false reporting. That's potentially hate crime territory." He paused, watching Karen's mansion across the water where she was undoubtedly pacing in designer heels, waiting for news of my arrest. The sound of water lapping against dock pilings filled the silence before he continued. "We've been tracking a pattern of false emergency reports from this county for 8 months. Your case might be the keystone that brings down a much larger federal investigation." The Coast Guard had been quietly documenting Dale's systematic abuse of emergency reporting systems to harass political opponents and cover corruption schemes. Karen's terrorism report was the crown jewel of false federal complaints, made even more serious by targeting a veteran under laws specifically protecting military personnel from official retaliation. Elena arrived as the Coast Guard finished their inspection, her professional smile carrying the predatory satisfaction of someone who just watched an enemy commit suicide on camera. "Marcus, I just got off the phone with FBI Public Corruption. Karen's terrorism report automatically triggered federal hate crime protocols since you're a Hispanic veteran. The irony was so perfect it belonged in a movie. In trying to destroy me with false federal terrorism charges, Karen had invited federal civil rights investigation of her entire operation. Every false complaint, every abuse of sheriff authority, every racist targeting of minority veterans was now under federal hate crime review." Commander Bradley's radio crackled with final reports from his inspection team as they documented my island's complete federal compliance. The sound of official vindication echoed across the water while Karen's empire began crumbling under the federal scrutiny she'd invited. "Mr. Rodriguez," Bradley said, shaking my hand with genuine military respect, "your structure exceeds federal safety standards. Someone's going to federal prison for wasting Coast Guard resources with fraudulent terrorism reports." As their cutter disappeared into morning mist, I savored coffee that tasted like freedom while watching Karen's silhouette frantically pacing behind mansion windows. The evening breeze would soon carry something sweeter than lake air, the scent of federal justice grinding toward entitled criminals who thought badges made them untouchable. The bombshell that cracked Karen's empire wide open came from the most unexpected source: her own husband's financial desperation and Elena's bloodhound instincts for following paper trails that corrupt politicians always think they've hidden cleverly. Elena called Thursday evening while I was grilling fish on my island's deck, the smell of charcoal smoke mixing with evening lake breeze that carried the honest scent of water and freedom. Her voice vibrated with the electric excitement of a prosecutor who just found the evidence that ends careers and starts prison sentences. "Marcus, you sitting down?" she asked, though I was already leaning against my workshop railing, watching sunset paint the water the color of molten gold. Dale Pemberton's construction company is drowning in debt, $6.8 million to creditors who don't accept late payments gracefully. The fish spatula nearly slipped from my fingers as understanding hit like cold lake water. This wasn't just petty HOA tyranny. It was financial desperation driving systematic theft of waterfront property. "It gets better," Elena continued, and I could hear papers shuffling as she read from financial records spread across what I imagined was her dining room table. "Every property Karen's HOA has seized over 6 years, sold below market value to shell companies that immediately transferred them to Dale's development projects. They've been stealing land to pay construction debts." My island suddenly made perfect sense as a target. $3 million worth of floating real estate could buy Dale months of breathing room with creditors who probably had very creative collection methods. Karen wasn't protecting community standards. She was literally fighting for her family's financial survival. The personal revelation hit even harder when Elena discovered Dale's political timeline driving their desperation. He was running for state legislature on a fiscal responsibility platform while operating the biggest embezzlement scheme in county history. My resistance threatened to expose everything before November elections that would give him legislative immunity from prosecution. "Here's the part that'll make you want to throw something," Elena said, her voice dropping to the disgusted tone reserved for truly despicable discoveries. "They've been specifically targeting veteran families. 14 properties over 6 years, every single homeowner either military or minority working class. This isn't random corruption, it's systematic targeting." The bitter taste of understanding filled my mouth as I grasped the true scope of their operation. Karen's community standards had been ethnic and economic cleansing, removing anyone who didn't fit their wealthy white vision of lakefront perfection. But the revelation that would ultimately destroy them came from Dale's own paranoid record-keeping designed to protect himself from his business partners. "Marcus, Dale kept detailed financial records of every transaction because he was afraid of being cheated by his own shell company partners," Elena explained, her voice taking on the clinical precision of someone reading evidence that would ruin lives. "His paranoia created a perfect paper trail for federal prosecutors. Every forced sale, every below-market transfer, every veteran family driven from their homes had been meticulously documented by the man orchestrating the crimes. Dale's fear of his criminal associates had made him the perfect government witness against himself. The federal banking investigation had been tracking suspicious money flows for months, following construction payments through multiple companies before disappearing into accounts controlled by Dale's business network. My HOA dispute had provided the missing piece, evidence of systematic civil rights violations that elevated financial crimes to federal hate crime prosecutions." Elena's voice carried satisfaction thick as Texas honey as she delivered the final blow. "The FBI has been building a RICO case for 8 months. Karen's terrorism report against you just triggered federal hate crime charges because you're a Hispanic veteran. They elevated their own crimes to federal mandatory minimums." I felt my grandfather's challenge coin warming in my pocket as the deeper meaning crystallized. This fight wasn't just about my island. I'd become the catalyst exposing a corruption network that had been systematically destroying families like mine for years. The leverage shift was complete. Karen and Dale now faced federal racketeering charges, civil rights violations, and filing false terrorism reports. Every abuse of authority was now evidence in a federal case that would echo through Texas politics. "They know indictments are coming," Elena finished, her words carrying the weight of inevitable justice. "Karen's planning one final seizure attempt before assets get frozen. She needs your island liquidated and money moved offshore immediately." As evening settled over Lake Travis, I watched lights blazing in Karen's mansion and smiled. Her desperation would force her into committing federal crimes with Coast Guard surveillance documenting every violation. Perfect. Time to let greed and panic destroy what money and corruption had built. The moment Elena finished explaining Karen's financial desperation, my military planning instincts kicked into overdrive like a diesel engine hitting full throttle. 20 years of Navy operations had taught me one critical lesson. When the enemy is cornered and desperate, they become most dangerous, and most likely to make fatal mistakes you can exploit. I assembled my team like we were planning a combat operation because in many ways we were fighting a war against corruption that wore badges and expensive suits instead of uniforms. Elena brought federal law expertise and connections that could navigate bureaucracy faster than a torpedo through water. Commander Bradley provided Coast Guard authority and maritime jurisdiction knowledge earned through 25 years of protecting American waters from criminals who thought money made them untouchable. Agent Sarah Emerson from FBI Public Corruption had been tracking Dale's money laundering for months, waiting for the right moment to spring a trap that would echo through Texas politics. The strategy session took place in my island workshop. Charts and legal documents spread across workbenches that still carried the honest smell of sawdust and WD-40. Elena's laptop displayed financial flowcharts that looked like battle plans, tracking money from county contracts through shell companies to offshore accounts with the precision of missile targeting systems. Karen has maybe 72 hours before federal asset freezes kick in, Agent Emerson explained, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone who'd destroyed corruption networks from Miami boardrooms to Seattle city halls. She'll have to move fast and sloppy, which means making mistakes we can document. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, planning to defend my peaceful floating home with the same tactical precision I'd once used to secure Iraqi harbors from insurgents. Except this time, the enemy wore designer heels and carried fake legal documents instead of RPGs. My island's defensive positioning was already perfect, surrounded by deep water that forced approaching boats into predictable channels, with clear sight lines for documentation and federal response. The floating platform gave me mobility that land-based targets never enjoyed, while federal water jurisdiction provided constitutional protection that local corruption couldn't penetrate. But the real genius of our plan was letting Karen hang herself with her own desperation and greed. Commander Bradley outlined the maritime law enforcement strategy with military precision, his weathered hands tracing approach routes on nautical charts. The moment she attempts armed seizure in federal jurisdiction, Coast Guard has constitutional authority to intervene with appropriate force. Every action will be documented for federal prosecution under maritime law. The community mobilization revealed just how many people Karen had terrorized over 6 years of HOA tyranny. Jake Morrison organized a flotilla of marina customers who'd been threatened with license revocations for supporting me. His gruff voice carried decades of frustration as he coordinated boat owners who were finally ready to fight back. "That woman's been squeezing folks like a vice for years," Jake growled, tobacco-stained fingers pointing to dock positions on our planning map. "Time she learned what happens when you mess with people who actually work for a living." The Rodriguez family from across the lake, whose teenage son had been harassed by deputies for studying while Hispanic on their own dock, volunteered witness testimony that would expose the racial targeting Karen thought she'd hidden cleverly. Mrs. Emerson, whose elderly husband had been cited for excessive fishing while using their own property, brought 3 years of documentation proving systematic discrimination. Elena coordinated with targeted families through secure channels, building a network of victims ready to testify with federal protection. The smell of fresh coffee and righteous anger filled my workshop as families shared stories of harassment that painted Karen as a small-town dictator who'd forgotten this was still America. The legal strategy was beautiful in its constitutional simplicity. Every law Karen and Dale had twisted for personal gain would be used against them with federal authority behind it. Civil rights violations, conspiracy, filing false reports, abuse of authority, the charges would stack like firewood until their corruption network collapsed under federal justice. Intelligence gathering revealed Karen's timeline and increasing desperation. Dale's construction company had missed 2 payments to creditors who didn't accept apologies or excuses. Bank records showed declining cash flow and mounting pressure to liquidate assets immediately. "She's cornered like a rabid raccoon," Elena observed, studying financial documents spread across my workbench like evidence at Nuremberg trials. "Dale's campaign spent money they didn't have, counting on stealing your island to cover debts. Without it, they faced bankruptcy and federal prison." The coordination with federal authorities was seamless as a well-oiled machine. Agent Emerson positioned FBI surveillance teams to document attempted crimes. Commander Bradley arranged Coast Guard rapid response within 5 minutes of distress calls. Texas Rangers provided backup authority for jurisdictional disputes that might arise. My role was elegantly simple: remain visible, stay legal, and let Karen's desperation drive her into committing federal crimes with maximum documentation. The island's live stream capability would broadcast her downfall to thousands of viewers following our David versus Goliath story. As evening settled over our final strategy session, the taste of approaching victory was sweeter than championship barbecue. Karen's greed, Desperation and corrupt authority would soon collide with federal law enforcement and constitutional justice in a confrontation that would be remembered for decades. Karen's desperation reached full-blown panic mode when federal asset freeze warnings arrived at Dale's construction company Monday morning like financial death warrants. Elena's FBI contacts confirmed that Karen had exactly 48 hours before their accounts would be locked tighter than a military safe, forcing her into the most reckless gambit of her privileged life. She convinced Dale to mobilize every corrupt resource they controlled for one final assault on my island, throwing together a plan that combined the subtlety of a bulldozer with the legality of bank robbery. The scheme was pure criminal insanity. Declare a structural emergency, requiring immediate seizure of my dangerous floating platform, backed by sheriff's SWAT team and justified by engineering reports faker than her eyelashes. Tuesday morning brought the angry rumble of multiple boat engines roaring across Lake Travis like mechanized locusts swarming a crop field. Through binoculars, I watched sheriff's patrol boats, Dale's emergency response vessel, and what appeared to be construction workers cosplaying as tactical officers approaching my island with all the professionalism of a Three Stooges routine. The radio chatter I intercepted on emergency frequencies revealed Karen's complete disconnection from reality. Her voice, pitched higher than a smoke alarm, directed the operation like Napoleon commanding Waterloo. Secure that terrorist structure. Arrest the suspect for resisting lawful authority. The acrid smell of desperation mixed with diesel exhaust as her makeshift armada surrounded my island like pirates attacking a treasure galleon. Except these pirates wore designer sunglasses and carried clipboards instead of cutlasses. But my silent preparation had transformed this confrontation into the most expensive federal sting operation in county history. Agent Emerson's surveillance team recorded everything from multiple angles, while Commander Bradley's Coast Guard cutter waited beyond the horizon like a sleeping giant ready to awaken. Elena monitored from the marina with direct lines to federal prosecutors who would file charges faster than Karen could say, "Emergency authority." The mini-twist that sealed Karen's fate came when she stepped onto my dock, wearing what looked like a security guard badge from a costume shop and carrying a briefcase full of documents so obviously forged that even Dale's corrupt deputies started backing away from the legal disaster unfolding before their eyes. "Mr. Rodriguez," she announced through a bullhorn that made her sound like a carnival barker having a nervous breakdown, "this structure is condemned under emergency federal authority. You have exactly 5 minutes to evacuate before we remove you by force." I calmly activated my GoPro livestream and responded through my workshop PA system with the patience of a kindergarten teacher addressing a particularly slow child. "Ma'am, you're impersonating federal officials while attempting armed robbery on federal waters. The prosecutors are watching live. Wave hello." The taste of inevitable victory mixed with morning coffee as Karen's SWAT team began recognizing the difference between legitimate law enforcement and a county commissioner's wife having a public psychotic break. Several deputies started edging toward their boats when they realized they were being asked to commit federal crimes on camera for an audience of thousands. But Karen's financial desperation had burned away her last connection to sanity. She ordered her private tactical team, revealed later to be Dale's construction workers wearing borrowed police gear, to board my island and neutralize the terrorist threat using appropriate force. The moment armed civilians attempted to assault my legally occupied structure in federal waters, Commander Bradley's Coast Guard cutter crested the horizon with sirens wailing and federal authority that made Karen's costume jewelry badge look like a cereal box prize. "This is the United States Coast Guard," Bradley's voice thundered across the water through military speakers that could wake the dead. "All vessels will maintain current positions while federal law enforcement responds to reports of armed robbery and impersonation of federal officials." Karen's reaction was pure entitled rage mixed with dawning horror as she realized her corruption network had zero power over actual constitutional authority. She began shrieking about federal overreach and violation of states' rights, while Coast Guard officers documented every word for hate crime prosecution. The rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors announced FBI air support arriving to film her meltdown from above, while Texas Rangers boats appeared from the eastern shore to prevent escape attempts. Karen's emergency operation had become a federal crime scene with her starring as the primary defendant. But the most satisfying moment came when Deputy Wilson, apparently tired of being used for illegal harassment, approached Karen's boat with handcuffs gleaming in morning sunlight. "Ma'am," he said with obvious relief, "you're under arrest for impersonating federal officials, conspiracy to commit armed robbery, and whatever other charges these federal agents want to add. The smell of Karen's burning political career mixed with diesel exhaust as federal agents swarmed her amateur hour crime spree. Her fake badge and forged documents became evidence that would add decades to her prison sentence. Elena's voice crackled through my radio with real-time updates. Marcus, federal prosecutors are filing charges as we speak. Impersonating federal officials, conspiracy, civil rights violations, attempted robbery under color of authority. Karen just bought herself federal mandatory minimums. As Coast Guard officers seized Karen's briefcase of fraudulent documents, I savored coffee that tasted like constitutional justice served hot. 6 years of terrorism disguised as HOA authority had collapsed in 30 minutes of federal law enforcement. Karen's arrest should have ended everything, but her desperation had infected Dale like a political virus, pushing him into one final act of governmental suicide that would cement their family's destruction in Texas political folklore for generations. While Karen sat in federal custody, probably wondering if orange jumpsuits came in designer colors, Dale used his remaining county commissioner authority for an emergency meeting designed to ratify her island seizure and provide retroactive government blessing for what everyone now recognized as armed robbery with badges. His plan reeked of the same delusional thinking that had driven their entire corruption empire. If you can't win legally, just change the laws after you've already broken them. Dale was essentially trying to make bank robbery legal by having the city council vote on it after the vault was already emptied. The emergency county meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning with suspicious speed, requiring commissioners to vote on emergency property seizures in the public interest without proper legal review or public notice. Dale's desperate gamble was transforming Karen's federal crimes into legitimate government action through bureaucratic sleight of hand. But what Dale didn't realize was that his emergency meeting had become the crown jewel of the largest federal sting operation in county history. Elena's contacts in the DA's office revealed that 3 of 5 county commissioners were secretly cooperating with federal investigators, wearing recording devices and following FBI scripts designed to document Dale's final descent into federal racketeering charges. His emergency meeting would become a recorded confession played for juries until the end of time. The courthouse Thursday morning smelled like nervous sweat mixed with the kind of cheap coffee that government buildings seem legally required to serve. Residents, media, and federal agents disguised as journalists packed every seat while Dale prepared to commit political suicide in front of the largest audience of his career. Agent Emerson positioned surveillance teams throughout the building while Commander Bradley coordinated Coast Guard units ready to respond if Dale attempted another assault on my island. The taste of approaching justice was sweeter than Texas barbecue as federal law enforcement prepared to document Dale's final crimes. My role was elegantly simple. Sit with Elena and watch Dale hang himself with his own words while federal recording equipment preserved every syllable for prosecutors who were already drafting RICO indictments. Dale arrived wearing the confident expression of a man who still believed political authority could override federal law enforcement, carrying a briefcase full of resolutions designed to retroactively legalize his wife's terrorism. His expensive suit couldn't hide the desperate sweat stains under his arms as he called the meeting to order, with the authority of a ship captain trying to navigate the Titanic away from an iceberg. The mini-twist that shattered Dale's final scheme came when Commissioner Janet Phillips, a silver-haired grandmother who'd been documenting his corruption for 8 months, stood up and delivered the political equivalent of a nuclear weapon. "Mr. Chairman," she announced, with the sweet venom of a Sunday school teacher who'd caught the preacher stealing from the collection plate. "I move to table this illegal resolution while presenting evidence of racketeering that federal prosecutors have specifically requested I share with this body." The sound of Dale's jaw hitting the floor was audible across the courthouse as Phillips began reading from FBI-prepared notes detailing every illegal transaction, every forced property seizure, every abuse of authority that had funded his political career. The man who thought he controlled county government discovered he'd been under federal surveillance longer than some presidential campaigns. But Dale's financial desperation drove him into even deeper federal crimes rather than strategic retreat. He began threatening commissioners with the subtlety of a mob boss having a public meltdown. "Anyone voting against this emergency resolution will find their departments defunded, their staff eliminated, and their political careers destroyed," Dale snarled, his voice carrying the desperate edge of a cornered rat. "I control county budgets, and I'll remember every betrayal when budget season arrives." Agent Emerson later told me that single threat was worth years of investigation. A county official attempting witness intimidation on federal recording equipment while committing obstruction of justice charges that carried mandatory minimum sentences. Elena stood up with the calm precision of a surgeon making the final incision and delivered Dale's political death blow. Mr. Chairman, you're currently under sealed federal indictment for racketeering, money laundering, and civil rights violations. These threats constitute additional federal charges for witness intimidation and obstruction of justice. The courthouse atmosphere shifted like air pressure dropping before a tornado as commissioners began abandoning Dale's sinking ship with Olympic-level speed. Phillips moved for his immediate suspension pending federal charges, seconded so fast by other commissioners that it sounded like an automatic weapon firing. Dale's final meltdown was spectacular in its complete divorce from reality. He stood up, pointed at Elena like an angry toddler, and began screaming about federal conspiracies designed to destroy legitimate local authority. "This is still America," he bellowed, spittle flying while his face turned the color of overripe tomatoes. "County commissioners don't answer to federal bureaucrats trying to destroy our traditional way of governing. We'll fight this federal tyranny in every courthouse from here to Washington." The irony was delicious enough to serve at state dinners. A man who'd laundered money through federal contracts was now claiming federal oversight violated his constitutional rights. As federal marshals approached with handcuffs that gleamed under fluorescent lights, Dale made one final desperate appeal to commissioners who were already voting unanimously to cooperate with his prosecution. The smell of political death filled the courthouse as Dale's corruption empire collapsed under federal justice that his money and connections couldn't influence. The packed courthouse on that Thursday morning felt like the Roman Colosseum waiting for gladiators, except our arena was filled with reporters, federal agents, angry residents, and enough recording equipment to film a Hollywood blockbuster. Every seat was occupied, standing room only, with overflow crowds gathering on courthouse steps to witness the final destruction of Karen and Dale's corruption empire. Karen arrived in federal custody, wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed magnificently with her bleached hair and the kind of handcuffs that don't come from boutique jewelry stores. Her usual designer armor had been replaced by government-issued humility, but her entitled attitude remained unchanged. She still believed money and connections would save her from constitutional justice. Dale sat at the defendant's table looking like a man who just realized his political career was about to become a cautionary tale told in law schools for decades. The smell of his nervous sweat mixed with courthouse disinfectant as he clutched legal documents that had less authority than a grocery store receipt. Elena stood at the prosecutor's table with the confident bearing of someone holding 4 aces in a poker game, surrounded by federal evidence that could fill a small library. Agent Emerson and Commander Bradley occupied the front row like military honor guards protecting constitutional democracy from domestic corruption. The media presence was overwhelming. Local news crews, national reporters, and citizen journalists with smartphones had transformed Dale's emergency meeting into the most documented political suicide in Texas history. Karen's terrorism had attracted attention from coast to coast, making their family names synonymous with HOA abuse and government corruption. Judge Martinez called the session to order with the grave authority of someone presiding over a historical moment that would be remembered long after everyone present was dead and buried. "We're here," the judge announced, "to address emergency resolutions and federal charges arising from recent events involving property seizures, civil rights violations, and conspiracy charges that have attracted national attention to our county." Dale stood up with the desperate confidence of a man trying to convince everyone that gravity doesn't apply to him personally. He began reading from prepared remarks that attempted to frame Karen's terrorism as legitimate law enforcement, and my resistance as dangerous extremism threatening community safety. "Your Honor," Dale began, his voice cracking like adolescent boy trying to sound authoritative. "This emergency resolution seeks to protect our community from individuals who use federal loopholes to evade legitimate local authority. The defendant's floating structure represents a clear and present danger to public safety that requires immediate action." The courtroom erupted in laughter as Dale essentially confessed to viewing constitutional rights as federal loopholes that interfered with his personal authority. Even his own attorney looked like he wanted to crawl under the defense table and disappear into witness protection. Elena rose with the predatory grace of a shark who'd been circling wounded prey for months, carrying a briefcase full of evidence that would transform Dale's emergency resolution into his political obituary. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying the crystal clarity of absolute legal authority. "The defendants have systematically violated federal civil rights laws, filed false terrorism reports, laundered money through government contracts, and used official authority for personal enrichment over a 6-year period affecting 14 military families." She opened her briefcase and began presenting evidence like a magician revealing the secrets behind impossible tricks. Financial records showing money laundering, recordings of false federal reports, photographs of selective enforcement targeting minority veterans, video evidence of Karen's terrorism and Dale's witness intimidation. The taste of inevitable justice filled the courthouse air as Elena methodically destroyed every lie, every false claim, every corrupt justification that had protected Karen and Dale's criminal enterprise for years. But the mic drop moment that would be replayed on news channels for decades came when Elena played Karen's own words from her terrorism report, claiming my island contained explosive devices and weapons manufacturing equipment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elena announced as Karen's voice echoed through courthouse speakers, "you're hearing a county commissioner's wife filing false terrorism reports against a decorated Navy veteran whose only crime was building a legal structure that threatened their money laundering operation." The courtroom gasped as Elena revealed the scope of their corruption network, explaining how every veteran family driven from their homes had fed money into offshore accounts that funded Dale's political campaigns. Karen's face turned white as courthouse lighting as she realized the federal evidence was comprehensive enough to convict her using her own recorded confessions. Judge Martinez's final ruling came with the authority of constitutional justice that had been temporarily delayed but never defeated. The emergency resolution is denied as legally invalid. The defendants will remain in federal custody pending trial on charges including racketeering, money laundering, civil rights violations, filing false federal reports, and conspiracy to commit theft under color of authority. As federal marshals led Karen and Dale away in handcuffs, the courthouse erupted in applause from families who'd been terrorized by their corruption for years. The sound of justice served echoed through marble halls like thunder announcing the end of a political storm that had devastated too many lives. Elena's final words to gathered media captured the moment perfectly. "This case proves that constitutional rights aren't suggestions, and federal law enforcement doesn't recognize local corruption as legitimate authority. No one is above the law in America, regardless of their political connections or personal wealth." 2 years later, Lake Travis looks completely different. Not because the water changed, but because justice has a way of cleaning up more than just individual cases. Karen received 8 years in federal prison plus $3.2 million in restitution to the families she'd terrorized. Her appeals were rejected faster than expired coupons at a grocery store, and she's currently serving time at a federal facility that doesn't accept designer handbags or attitude adjustments. Dale got 12 years plus forfeiture of all assets connected to his money laundering operation, including the mansion that now serves as a community center for veteran services. The immediate aftermath was beautiful to watch unfold. Every family Karen had forced from their homes received federal restitution that allowed them to return or purchase better properties without HOA tyranny. The Rodriguez family bought a larger lakefront home and started a scholarship fund for Hispanic veterans pursuing engineering degrees. Mrs. Emerson's husband returned to fishing from his own dock without fear of harassment citations for excessive relaxation. Jake Morrison was elected as president of the new Lakeside Community Association, a genuine homeowners group that replaced Karen's personal fiefdom with transparent democracy and constitutional respect. His first official act was establishing a Veteran Property Rights Protection Program that provides free legal assistance for military families facing HOA abuse anywhere in Texas. My island became something I never expected, a symbol of individual liberty that attracted visitors from across America. The Texas legislature passed the Rodriguez Act, limiting HOA authority over federal waters and requiring disclosure of board member financial conflicts. Congressional hearings on HOA reform featured my case as evidence that local corruption requires federal oversight to protect constitutional rights. But the personal healing meant more than any political victory. My floating fortress evolved into Grandpa Eduardo's Memorial Workshop, where I teach marine engineering and constitutional law to veterans who want to build their own pieces of American freedom. The smell of sawdust and honest work fills the air while former military personnel learn skills that can't be taken away by corrupt officials or entitled bureaucrats. The workshop programs expanded beyond my wildest expectations. Disabled veterans learn welding and electrical work that leads to civilian careers with dignity and independence. Combat engineers share knowledge about sustainable living and off-grid systems that provide freedom from utility companies and government dependency. The taste of black coffee shared with brothers and sisters who understand service and sacrifice makes every sunrise worth celebrating. Elena's civil rights law firm established the Lake Travis Foundation, providing legal services for families facing HOA discrimination nationwide. Her success prosecuting Karen and Dale attracted federal attention, leading to appointment as a federal prosecutor specializing in government corruption cases. She's currently investigating similar schemes in 12 other states, using our case as a template for protecting constitutional rights from local tyranny. The broader impact rippled through Texas politics like waves from a dropped boulder. Federal corruption investigations expanded to 3 adjacent counties where Dale's business network had operated similar schemes. The FBI's Public Corruption Unit established a permanent task force investigating HOA abuse as a civil rights violation, with Agent Emerson leading efforts that have resulted in over 40 federal prosecutions. Commander Bradley retired from the Coast Guard and started a consulting company helping property owners understand federal water rights and maritime law. His expertise in constitutional navigation, both literal and legal, has protected dozens of families from local authority that exceeds legitimate jurisdiction. The sound of his boat engines approaching still means help is coming for anyone facing governmental abuse on American waters. The community transformation was remarkable to witness. Property values increased when residents realized they lived in an area where constitutional rights were actually protected and enforced. New families moved in specifically because federal precedent guaranteed their liberty couldn't be stolen by corrupt officials or entitled neighbors. The evening air carries laughter from children playing freely without fear their parents will face harassment for excessive family joy. My annual Constitution on the Water celebration draws thousands of visitors who come to see the island where individual liberty defeated organized corruption. Veterans, families, and freedom-loving Americans gather to share barbecue, stories, and renewed faith that constitutional justice still works when good people refuse to surrender to bullies with badges. The scholarship program funded by restitution money has helped 37 veteran families pursue education in engineering, law, and public service. These Americans will protect the next generation from the kind of corruption that nearly destroyed our community. Their success tastes sweeter than any personal victory because it multiplies freedom across generations. As I write this from my workshop deck, watching sunset paint the water gold while American flags fly from solar-powered poles throughout our community, I can hear Grandpa Eduardo's voice carried on evening breeze. Stand your ground, mijo. Liberty belongs to those brave enough to defend it. The lesson for everyone watching is simple. Corrupt authority depends on good people staying silent and isolated. When we stand together, document everything, and demand constitutional justice, even entitled criminals with badges learn that America still belongs to we the people. Drop a comment sharing your own HOA nightmare. We're building a national database to help other families fight back, and your story might be featured in our next investigation. Smash that subscribe button because we're just getting started exposing corrupt officials who think they can crush regular Americans while hiding behind fake authority and expensive lawyers.